What if the racing thoughts, worst-case scenarios, and paralyzing worry that define modern anxiety could be transformed using mental tools developed by ancient philosophers who faced plagues, wars, and exile with unshakable peace? At 2:30 a.m., Tyler Mitchell lies awake in bed, his mind spinning through an endless loop of what-if scenarios. What if the client presentation goes badly tomorrow? What if his manager notices the mistake he made last week? What if the strange noise his car made means expensive repairs he can't afford? What if his relationship problems mean he'll end up alone? Each worry triggers another, creating a cascade of anxiety that makes sleep impossible and tomorrow's challenges feel insurmountable. Tyler's experience is shared by millions of people who find themselves trapped in what psychologists call anticipatory anxiety, suffering not from actual problems but from the endless parade of potential problems conjured by an overactive imagination. This modern epidemic of chronic worry would have been deeply familiar to the ancient Stoics, who developed their philosophy specifically to address what they called passions, destructive emotional states that disturb the soul's natural tranquility. But here's what makes the Stoic approach to anxiety unique and remarkably effective. Instead of trying to eliminate anxious thoughts or suppress uncomfortable feelings, they developed systematic methods for changing our relationship to uncertainty, fear, and mental suffering. They understood that anxiety isn't caused by external events but by our judgments about those events, and that these judgments can be examined, challenged, and transformed through disciplined practice. The Stoics identified anxiety as fundamentally a disorder of time and control. We become anxious when our minds project into an uncertain future or ruminate about an unchangeable past, and when we attempt to control outcomes that lie beyond our influence. This creates what Marcus Aurelius called double suffering. We suffer first from imagining problems that may never occur, and then we suffer again if those problems actually manifest. Seneca, who experienced severe anxiety attacks during his youth, wrote extensively about the relationship between our thoughts and our emotional states. He observed that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and that some things torment us more than they ought. Some torment us before they ought, and some torment us when they ought not to torment us at all. This insight forms the foundation of cognitive behavioral therapy, but Seneca was applying it systematically 2 millennia before modern psychology discovered its effectiveness. The key insight that transformed Seneca's relationship with anxiety was recognizing that anxious thoughts are not facts about the world but mental activities that we can observe, evaluate, and respond to skillfully. Instead of automatically believing every worried thought that arose in his mind, Seneca learned to treat these thoughts as temporary mental events that didn't require his agreement or emotional investment. This perspective shift is profound because it moves us from being victims of our own minds to becoming skillful managers of our mental content. When we understand that thoughts are not truths, and that emotions are information rather than instructions, we regain agency over our inner experience even when external circumstances remain challenging or uncertain. Modern neuroscience has validated this ancient wisdom with remarkable precision. Research shows that anxiety disorders involve hyperactivity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, combined with reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, the brain's reasoning center. The Stoic practices will explore actually strengthen prefrontal function while calming amygdala reactivity, creating measurable changes in brain structure and function. But the Stoics went beyond individual anxiety management to understand anxiety as a philosophical problem rooted in fundamental misconceptions about the nature of security, control, and human flourishing. They recognized that our culture's emphasis on external achievements, material security, and social approval creates a foundation of sand. When our peace of mind depends on things we cannot ultimately control, anxiety becomes inevitable. Epictetus, who had experienced the ultimate loss of control during his years as a slave, developed perhaps the most practical framework for understanding and transcending anxiety. His dichotomy of control isn't just a philosophical concept, but a daily practice that transforms how we approach uncertainty and difficulty. According to Epictetus, everything in life falls into one of three categories. Things completely within our control, our judgments, values, and responses. Things completely outside our control, other people's actions, natural events, past and future. And things partially within our control, our health, reputation, and success. Anxiety, he observed, always arises from trying to control things in the second category, or becoming overly attached to outcomes in the third category. Consider how this framework might have helped Amanda Foster, a marketing director who developed severe anxiety about her company's upcoming restructuring. Amanda spent weeks obsessing about scenarios she couldn't influence. Which departments might be eliminated, how the new leadership would evaluate her performance, whether her job would survive the changes, what her financial situation would be if she were laid off. Each of these worries fell into Epictetus's second category, completely outside Amanda's control. Her anxiety was the natural result of mental energy being directed toward outcomes she could not influence. When Amanda discovered Stoic principles, she learned to redirect her attention toward the first category, how she could add value during the transition, how she could support her team through uncertainty, how she could update her skills and network regardless of what happened with the restructuring. This shift didn't eliminate Amanda's concerns about the future, but it transformed her relationship with uncertainty from helpless worry to purposeful preparation. Instead of being paralyzed by anxiety about unknown outcomes, she became energized by focusing on constructive actions within her control. The Stoic approach to anxiety also addresses one of the most challenging aspects of modern worry: the tendency for anxious thoughts to feel urgent and important even when they're neither. Our brains evolved to prioritize potential threats, which served our ancestors well in dangerous environments but creates chronic stress in our relatively safe modern world. Marcus Aurelius developed what we might call philosophical triage, the ability to distinguish between thoughts that deserve serious attention and thoughts that can be acknowledged and released. In his personal journals, he reminded himself that most of our mental chatter consists of vain imaginings that dissolve under careful examination. The ancient Stoics developed 5 specific practices for transforming anxiety into calm clarity, each designed to address different aspects of how worry develops and persists in the human mind. These aren't temporary coping strategies, but systematic retraining methods that build lasting resilience against anxiety-provoking thoughts and situations. The first practice is what we might call temporal grounding. the deliberate return of attention to the present moment when the mind becomes lost in anxious projections about the future or regretful rumination about the past. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that the present moment is the only reality, and that suffering occurs when we mentally time travel away from what's actually happening now. This isn't the same as mindfulness meditation, though it shares some similarities. Stoic temporal grounding involves actively engaging with present reality through purposeful action rather than passive observation. When anxiety arises, instead of fighting the worried thoughts directly, you ask, "What can I do right now that would be useful and constructive?" This question redirects mental energy from unproductive worry toward beneficial activity. Let me share the story of Kevin Liu, a graduate student who was overwhelmed by anxiety about his dissertation defense, job market prospects, and academic career trajectory. Kevin's mind would spiral through catastrophic scenarios. What if his research wasn't original enough? What if the job market had no openings in his field? What if he had wasted years pursuing a degree that wouldn't lead to employment? These worries created a state of chronic stress that interfered with his ability to actually work on the dissertation. When Kevin applied temporal grounding, he learned to recognize when his mind was projecting into uncertain futures and deliberately return his attention to immediate, constructive actions. Instead of worrying about whether his research was original, he would work on the next paragraph. Instead of catastrophizing about the job market, he would send one email to a potential advisor or spend 30 minutes improving his teaching statement. This practice transformed Kevin's relationship with his academic work from anxious rumination to engaged productivity. The uncertain future remained uncertain, but Kevin was no longer suffering in advance from problems that might never materialize while neglecting the work that could actually influence his outcomes. The second practice is assumption examination, systematically questioning the beliefs and predictions that fuel anxious thinking. Seneca observed that we often torture ourselves with assumptions about other people's motivations, future events, and the significance of current difficulties that may be completely inaccurate. This practice involves asking specific questions when anxiety arises. What exactly am I assuming will happen? What evidence supports this assumption? What alternative explanations are possible? Am I treating my worst-case scenario as if it were the most likely scenario? How often have my anxious predictions actually come true in the past? Consider the case of Rebecca Martinez, a project manager who developed intense anxiety whenever her boss scheduled unexpected meetings. Rebecca's mind would immediately assume these meetings meant bad news, criticism of her work, budget cuts affecting her team, or even termination. This assumption created hours of unnecessary stress before meetings that often turned out to be routine check-ins or requests for her input on new projects. When Rebecca began examining her assumptions, she realized that her anxious predictions were based on one negative experience early in her career rather than the actual pattern of her current workplace. By consciously challenging her catastrophic interpretations, Rebecca learned to approach unexpected meetings with curiosity rather than dread, maintaining her emotional equilibrium regardless of the meeting's actual content. The third practice is philosophical reframing, deliberately choosing more empowering and accurate ways to interpret challenging situations. The Stoics understood that the same event can be viewed as a disaster, an inconvenience, a learning opportunity, or a chance to practice virtue depending on the mental framework we apply. This isn't about positive thinking or denial, but about flexible thinking. The ability to consider multiple perspectives and choose the one that enables the most constructive response. When facing difficulties, ask, how might this challenge be preparing me for something important? What strengths might I develop by navigating this situation skillfully? How could this experience contribute to my wisdom or character? Dr. Lisa Thompson, an emergency physician, discovered the power of philosophical reframing during a particularly stressful period when her hospital was short-staffed, and she was working excessive hours while dealing with increasingly difficult cases. Lisa's initial frame was victim-oriented. This job is destroying my health and personal life. The administration doesn't care about physician well-being. I'm being exploited and burned out. This perspective, while containing some truth, generated resentment and helplessness that made the situation feel unbearable. When Lisa applied Stoic reframing, she began viewing the same circumstances differently. This challenging period is teaching me about my own resilience and capacity. I'm developing skills in crisis management and medical decision-making under pressure. My service during this difficult time is making a real difference for patients who need care. The reframe didn't change Lisa's external circumstances, but it transformed her internal experience from victimhood to agency, from resentment to purpose. This shift in perspective enabled her to maintain effectiveness and find meaning even in genuinely difficult conditions. The fourth practice is circle of concern reduction. Deliberately narrowing your attention to matters where your actions can make a meaningful difference while releasing mental investment in issues beyond your influence. This practice directly addresses one of anxiety's most destructive patterns, the tendency to worry about everything that could go wrong rather than focusing on what you can actually improve. Practically, this involves creating what we might call worry boundaries. When anxious thoughts arise, ask, is this something I can influence through my actions? If yes, what's the next constructive step I can take? If no, how can I acknowledge this concern and redirect my energy towards something I can actually affect? The fifth practice is worst-case preparation. The counterintuitive technique of deliberately imagining negative outcomes while simultaneously planning how you would handle them. This isn't catastrophizing, which involves imagining disasters without solutions, but rather negative visualization combined with practical contingency planning. This practice serves multiple purposes. It reduces anxiety by removing the unknown from feared scenarios. It builds confidence by proving you could handle difficulties if they arose. And it often reveals that worst-case scenarios are more manageable than our anxious minds suggest. The key distinction is between productive and unproductive engagement with potential problems. Unproductive worry involves endlessly imagining disasters without developing responses. Productive preparation involves honestly assessing risks while creating concrete plans for managing them if they occur. The transformation from chronic anxiety to stoic calm doesn't happen overnight, but it follows predictable patterns that the ancient philosophers documented carefully. Understanding these stages of development helps maintain motivation during the inevitable setbacks and provides realistic expectations about the journey from reactive worry to philosophical tranquility. The first stage is what we might call awareness without action. the period when you begin recognizing anxious thought patterns but haven't yet developed the skills to respond differently. This stage can actually feel more difficult than unconscious anxiety, because you become acutely aware of how much mental energy you waste on unproductive worry, without yet having effective tools to redirect that energy. During this phase, the most important practice is what Marcus Aurelius called the observer stance. Learning to notice anxious thoughts as mental events rather than being completely identified with them. Instead of thinking, "I'm anxious about this presentation," you learn to observe, "I'm having anxious thoughts about this presentation." This subtle shift creates psychological distance that makes skillful response possible. Sarah Collins, a software engineer, described this stage as seeing the matrix of my own mind. She began noticing how her anxiety followed predictable patterns. Sunday evening worry about the upcoming work week, catastrophic thinking whenever she received unexpected emails from her manager, and spiral sessions where one small concern would trigger thoughts about every possible thing that could go wrong in her life. This awareness was initially overwhelming because Sarah realized how much of her mental life was dominated by unproductive worry. But this recognition became the foundation for all subsequent progress, because you cannot change patterns you don't recognize. The second stage is skillful intervention, the period when you begin successfully applying Stoic techniques to interrupt and redirect anxious thinking. This stage requires patience because the old patterns are deeply ingrained and the new responses feel unfamiliar and require conscious effort. During this phase, the most effective approach is choosing one or two specific techniques and practicing them consistently rather than trying to apply all Stoic principles simultaneously. Some people find temporal grounding most effective, immediately asking, "What can I do right now?" when anxiety arises. Others prefer assumption examination, systematically questioning the beliefs that fuel their worry. Michael Park, a marketing consultant, found that the dichotomy of control became his primary anxiety management tool. Whenever he caught himself worrying, Michael would write his concerns on paper and sort them into two columns: within my control and outside my control. This simple practice helped him recognize that about 80% of his worry focused on outcomes he couldn't influence. Michael then developed the habit of spending exactly 5 minutes creating action plans for items in the within my control column, while consciously releasing mental investment in the outside my control items. This practice didn't eliminate his tendency toward anxiety, but it provided a reliable method for redirecting worried energy toward productive action. The third stage is philosophical integration, the period when Stoic responses to anxiety become more automatic and you begin experiencing longer periods of natural calm. This stage represents a fundamental shift in your relationship with uncertainty and difficulty, moving from seeing these as threats to be avoided toward viewing them as normal aspects of human experience that can be navigated skillfully. During this phase, people often report that their baseline anxiety level decreases significantly, and when anxious thoughts do arise, they feel more like passing weather than overwhelming storms. The key development is what the Stoics called preferred indifference, maintaining clear preferences about outcomes while not being dependent on those outcomes for peace of mind. Dr. Janet Kim, a pediatrician, reached this stage after 2 years of consistent Stoic practice. She described the transformation. I still care deeply about my patient's outcomes and my own performance, but I'm no longer tortured by things I cannot control. When a case doesn't go as hoped, I focus on what I can learn and how I can improve rather than ruminating about what went wrong. This integration phase doesn't mean achieving perfect calm or never experiencing anxiety. Rather, it represents a mature relationship with mental and emotional states where temporary anxiety doesn't compromise your ability to think clearly and respond effectively. The fourth stage is wisdom sharing, the natural progression toward helping others develop similar capabilities. When you've experienced the transformation from chronic worry to philosophical calm, you often feel called to share these insights with others who are struggling with anxiety. This stage completes the Stoic understanding of personal development as preparation for service. The peace you've cultivated isn't meant to be hoarded but shared through modeling, teaching, or simply being a calming presence for others during difficult times. However, it's crucial to understand that these stages aren't linear or permanent. Life circumstances can temporarily return you to earlier patterns, especially during periods of unusual stress, loss, or major transition. The Stoics understood this and taught that wisdom involves accepting these fluctuations while maintaining commitment to philosophical practice. Marcus Aurelius, even after decades of Stoic training, still needed to remind himself of basic principles during challenging periods of his reign. His meditations reveal someone who had achieved remarkable psychological sophistication, yet continued practicing fundamental techniques for managing worry and maintaining perspective. This ongoing practice requirement is actually encouraging because it means you don't need to achieve perfection to benefit from Stoic approaches to anxiety. Even partial application of these principles can create significant improvements in mental peace and effectiveness, and the benefits tend to compound over time. The most common obstacles people encounter during this developmental process include expecting immediate results, trying to apply too many techniques simultaneously, becoming frustrated with setbacks, and treating Stoic practices as temporary coping strategies rather than fundamental life skills. The antidote to these obstacles is understanding that developing philosophical calm is like developing physical fitness. It requires consistent practice over extended periods, and the benefits are maintained through ongoing engagement rather than achieved once and kept forever. Another crucial insight is that the goal isn't to eliminate all anxiety but to develop a healthier relationship with anxious thoughts and feelings. Some anxiety serves useful functions, alerting us to genuine risks, motivating preparation for important events, and signaling when our values are threatened. The Stoic goal is wisdom in responding to anxiety rather than suppression of all anxious experience. This wisdom involves distinguishing between productive anxiety that motivates beneficial action and unproductive anxiety that creates suffering without serving any constructive purpose. Productive anxiety about an important presentation might motivate thorough preparation and skill development. Unproductive anxiety involves endless worry about the presentation without taking steps to improve your readiness. The ultimate mastery of anxiety through Stoic practice involves understanding what the ancient philosophers called ataraxia, a state of profound tranquility that emerges not from avoiding difficulties but from developing unshakable inner resources that remain stable regardless of external circumstances. This isn't detachment or emotional numbness, but rather what we might call engaged equanimity. The ability to care deeply while remaining psychologically grounded. The path to ataraxia requires integrating individual practices into what the Stoics called a philosophical way of life, a comprehensive approach where managing anxiety becomes part of a larger commitment to wisdom, virtue, and authentic living. This integration addresses anxiety at its roots rather than just managing its symptoms. Consider the remarkable example of Admiral James Stockdale, whose story we've touched on in previous discussions. During his 7 years as a prisoner of war, Stockdale faced not just physical hardship but psychological warfare designed to break his spirit and extract propaganda statements. His captors understood that the mind, not the body, was the ultimate battlefield. Stockdale's survival and leadership of fellow prisoners depended entirely on his ability to maintain inner calm, while facing genuine life-threatening uncertainty on a daily basis. He couldn't control his physical circumstances, the duration of his imprisonment, or even whether he would survive, but through disciplined application of Stoic principles, he maintained sovereignty over his thoughts, values, and responses. Stockdale later wrote that the prisoners who struggled most were those who maintained unrealistic optimism, constantly believing they would be released by Christmas or Easter or the next holiday. When these hopes were repeatedly shattered, many fell into despair. Meanwhile, those who accepted the brutal reality of their situation while maintaining faith in their ultimate survival demonstrated remarkable resilience. This Stockdale paradox perfectly illustrates the Stoic approach to anxiety. Radical acceptance of present reality combined with unwavering commitment to what remains within your control. This paradox resolves anxiety at its source by eliminating the gap between what we wish were true and what actually is true. But how do we apply this principle to the ordinary anxieties of modern life? Job security, relationship challenges, health concerns, financial pressures, family conflicts. The key is understanding that these contemporary worries are fundamentally the same as the challenges faced by ancient Stoics, just in different forms. Every generation faces uncertainty about the future, threats to what they value, and situations that test their character and resilience. The Stoics developed their philosophy not in ivory towers but in response to plagues, wars, political upheaval, personal betrayals, and loss of loved ones. Their insights about anxiety management were forged in the fires of genuine difficulty. The daily application of Stoic anxiety management begins with what Marcus Aurelius called morning preparation. Starting each day by acknowledging that you will likely encounter frustrations, setbacks, and unexpected challenges, and recommitting to responding with wisdom rather than reactivity. This isn't pessimism, but realistic preparation that prevents you from being thrown off balance by ordinary human difficulties. This morning practice might involve spending 5 minutes considering questions like, what challenging situations might arise today? And how do I want to respond to them? What would it look like to maintain my values under pressure today? If this were my last day, what would I want to focus on, and how would I want to treat others? These questions orient your mind toward virtue and intentionality rather than worry and reactivity. The evening complement to morning preparation is what Seneca called evening review. Honestly examining the day's experiences to identify where you responded wisely to anxiety-provoking situations and where you fell back into old patterns of worry and reactivity. This isn't self-criticism, but learning-oriented reflection that helps you recognize progress and identify areas for continued growth. During evening review, you might ask, when did I choose calm response over anxious reaction today? What triggered worry or stress, and how effectively did I apply Stoic principles? What did I learn about my own patterns of thinking and reacting? How can I prepare better for similar challenges tomorrow? This daily rhythm of preparation and review creates what we might call philosophical momentum. Gradual but steady development of anxiety management skills that compound over time. Like physical exercise, the benefits are subtle day by day but dramatic over months and years. The transformation from chronic anxiety to stoic calm also requires understanding the difference between legitimate concerns that deserve attention and mental habits of worry that serve no constructive purpose. The Stoics taught that wisdom involves responding appropriately to actual challenges while not creating additional suffering through anxious imagination. This discernment develops through practice and honest self-observation. Generally, legitimate concerns are specific, actionable, and connected to genuine risks or values. Mental habits of worry tend to be vague, repetitive, and focused on scenarios you cannot influence, or that are extremely unlikely to occur. When you catch yourself in unproductive worry, the Stoic response is neither to suppress the thoughts nor to engage with them extensively, but to acknowledge them and redirect your attention towards something constructive. This might mean taking action on a genuine concern, engaging in meaningful activity, or simply returning your attention to the present moment. The ultimate goal of Stoic anxiety management isn't to create a life free from all worry or stress, but to develop the inner resources that allow you to navigate uncertainty with grace, face difficulties with courage, and maintain your essential humanity regardless of external circumstances. This creates what the Stoics called the good life, not a life free from problems, but a life where problems become opportunities for practicing wisdom and virtue. As we conclude this exploration of ancient practices for modern anxiety, remember that the transformation from chronic worry to philosophical calm is possible for anyone willing to practice these principles consistently. The Stoics proved that ordinary people can develop extraordinary inner strength through disciplined attention to their thoughts, responses, and character development. The practices we've discussed, temporal grounding, assumption examination, philosophical reframing, circle of concern reduction, and worst-case preparation, are not just anxiety management techniques but life skills that enhance every aspect of human experience. They improve relationships by reducing reactive communication, enhance performance by eliminating mental energy waste, and increase resilience by building confidence in your ability to handle whatever challenges arise. Most importantly, these practices connect you to a tradition of wisdom that spans centuries and cultures, reminding you that the struggles you face are part of the universal human experience, and that countless others have found peace and purpose despite facing difficulties far greater than those we typically encounter in modern life. The anxiety you experience today is not a sign of weakness or failure, but an invitation to develop the kind of inner strength that enables you to serve others from a place of calm rather than chaos, to make decisions from wisdom rather than fear, and to face an uncertain future with confidence in your ability to respond skillfully to whatever emerges. If this exploration of Stoic approaches to anxiety has provided value, subscribe to our channel for more insights into how ancient wisdom can guide modern living. Remember that the journey from anxiety to calm begins with a single conscious choice to respond differently to the worried thoughts that arise in your mind. That choice is available to you right now, in this moment, regardless of what you're facing or how long you've struggled with worry. The Stoics believed that tranquility is your birthright, not because life will be easy, but because you have the capacity to develop wisdom that remains unshaken by life's inevitable challenges. That capacity is within you, waiting to be cultivated through patient practice and philosophical commitment. Until next time, remember that every moment of anxiety is an opportunity to practice the very skills that will eventually set you free.